He had not come to make a scene. He had not come early, and he had not come without reason. But in the time it took Callum Reid to cross the lobby of Hartwell Industrial Solutions and reach the front desk, the woman behind the glass partition had already decided what he was. She looked at his jacket, the dark Carhartt with the frayed cuff on the left sleeve, and then at his hands, which were clean but carried the kind of permanent stain that comes not from a single afternoon but from 20 years of work that no amount of soap fully undoes. She looked at the folder under his arm. She did not look at his face for more than a second. "Do you have an appointment?" He said he did not, but that he had been told by the contracts office to come in person and ask for a signature log on file 3987. He said it the way a person says something they have said before, not impatiently, but with the particular economy of someone who does not expect to be believed the first time. "That office is closed on Thursdays." "It wasn't closed when they called me," Callum said. The woman picked up her phone and turned slightly away from him. "Not far, just enough." Callum Reid was 41 years old and had been working with diesel engines and industrial hydraulics since he was 19. He had started at a small repair yard in Sudbury, Ontario, moved to a contracting firm outside of Thunder Bay when his daughter was 2, and ended up in Calgary when the work dried up, and a recruiter told him there was a company called Hartwell Industrial Solutions that needed someone who could read a schematic, the way other people read a sentence, not as a sequence of symbols, but as a conversation about what something was trying to do and why it was failing. He was not the kind of man who talked about being good at his job. He did not need to be. The machines told people what they needed to know. His wife, Claire, had died 3 years earlier. A February morning, a highway between Calgary and Airdrie, a patch of ice that no one had treated because the maintenance budget for that stretch had been cut the previous fall. Ellie was 8 at the time. She was 11 now. She had her mother's habit of reading the same paragraph twice when something interested her, and her father's habit of not saying much when something was wrong. Callum had kept going because there was no alternative that made any sense to him. He worked, he came home, he made dinner, he sat with Ellie while she did her homework, not helping, just being there, which she had told him once was the thing she needed most. He had not slept well in 3 years, but he had not told anyone that either. The folder under his arm contained the final inspection report for a hydraulic press system he had repaired and recertified over 11 weeks on a contract with Hartwell. It also contained a letter from the provincial safety office, confirming that his work met every current standard, a copy of the original contract with Hartwell's procurement signature, and a page of handwritten notes from 2 engineers at a competing firm who had reviewed his methodology and found it sound. He had brought the handwritten notes not because they were required, but because he had learned that documentation was the only language some people trusted. The lobby of Hartwell Industrial Solutions occupied the ground floor of a 12-story building in Calgary's Northwest Commercial District. The floors were polished concrete with inlaid wood paneling along the base of the walls. The reception desk was long and curved, staffed by 2 people at mid-morning on a Thursday, and behind it was a backlit logo the size of a shipping container door. The company had been founded by a man named Reginald Hartwell, who had died 8 years earlier and left controlling interest to his son-in-law, a man named Victor Stowe. Victor Stowe had not built anything. He had studied business in Montreal, worked briefly in private equity in Toronto, and married Hartwell's daughter during a period when the company was expanding and her father was tired. What Victor Stowe was good at was the appearance of control. He dressed precisely. He spoke in a register that suggested he had considered every word before releasing it. He kept people waiting in ways that felt like decisions rather than delays, and he smiled in meetings in a way that was technically warm but landed somewhere closer to tolerance. He was the kind of man who walked into a room and waited for people to notice, not because he needed the attention, but because he had learned that people who waited to be noticed were generally given more of everything than people who announce themselves. On Thursday morning, at the same moment that Callum was standing at the reception desk trying to get a signature log, Victor Stowe was in a glass-walled conference room on the 9th floor, reviewing the quarterly asset review with his chief financial officer. He was not thinking about File 3987. He was not thinking about the hydraulic press. He was not thinking about Callum Reid at all. The woman at the desk came back. She told Callum that someone from procurement would be down to speak with him and that he should have a seat. She said it with the professional neutrality of someone who had already made a separate call that had nothing to do with procurement. Callum sat. He had been sitting for 11 minutes when 2 uniformed security guards came through a door to the left of the reception desk and asked him to come with them. Not unkindly, but not gently either. In the way that people who work in security learn to speak, occupying a space exactly between request and instruction so that the person being addressed does not immediately know which one it is. Callum stood. He held his folder. He said he was waiting to speak with someone from procurement about a contract signature log. One of the guards said they were aware, and that there was a concern about an individual on the property without a registered appointment, and that they would need him to step outside. "I have a legal reason to be here," Callum said. "I have documentation of a contract under active review." The other guard said that was something that could be handled through the proper channels. "These are the proper channels," Callum said. He said it without raising his voice. He said it the way someone says a fact, not to argue, but because a fact was what it was. This was when Victor Stowe came off the elevator. He had not been called. He had seen the situation through the glass of the elevator as it descended, a man in a work jacket being flanked by 2 of his security staff in his lobby, and something in him had recognized an opportunity. Not a crisis. An opportunity. Because Victor Stowe understood lobbies the way other men understood balance sheets. A lobby was not just an entrance. It was a stage. And stages had audiences. There were 14 people in that lobby at the moment he stepped off the elevator. He counted. He always counted. He crossed to the reception desk without hurrying and asked, in a voice that carried without appearing to try, what the situation was. One of the guards explained. Victor Stowe looked at Callum Reid, at the jacket, at the folder, at the hands, and he smiled. Not the warm smile, the other one. "Sir," he said, "this is private property. I'm going to have to ask that you leave." Callum said he had a legal reason to be present and that he had documentation of a contract under active review. He said it the same way he had said it before. "I'm afraid I'm not aware of any such contract," Victor Stowe said. This was a lie. He was aware of it. He had been made aware of it 2 days earlier when the contracts office had forwarded a summary to his assistant, who had forwarded it to him, and he had read it and decided that the simplest thing to do was to let the clock run out on the review period without formally receiving the documentation. Not because the claim was frivolous, it was not, and he had enough legal experience to know that, but because Callum Reid was one man with a folder, and Victor Stowe was a man with a building. "I have a copy of the original contract with your procurement office's signature," Callum said. "I have an active review deadline attached to it." Then I'd suggest you pursue that through the appropriate legal channels," Victor Stowe said. "In the meantime, you're on private property, and I'm asking you to leave." He said it the way he said everything, not with heat, but with the particular weight of a man who is used to being the last word in any room he enters. Callum did not move. It was not defiance. It was not a performance. He simply did not move, because leaving was not the correct action given what the situation required, and Callum Reid was a man who did things that made sense. Victor Stowe looked at the security guards. He did not need to say anything. The look was enough. When the police arrived 8 minutes later, there were more people in the lobby. Maybe 22, Callum guessed, though he wasn't counting. A woman near the elevator had her phone out. 2 men in suits near the entrance had stopped walking to watch. The receptionist who had first spoken to him had found something to do at the far end of her desk that kept her facing away from the situation. Callum placed his folder on the reception counter when the officers approached. Face up. Identification on top of it. He did not put it away. He did not close it. He left it open in the manner of someone who had nothing to hide and wanted that fact to be part of whatever record was being assembled here. The officer who spoke to him was calm and professional. He said there had been a complaint about a person refusing to leave private property. Callum said he understood, and that he had a documented legal reason for his presence, and that the documentation was on the counter if the officer wanted to see it. The officer looked at Victor Stowe. Victor Stowe was smiling, not at the police officer, at the room, at the 22 people who were watching a man in a Carhartt jacket have his hands brought behind his back in the lobby of his building. Call anyone you want, Victor Stowe said. He said it toward Callum, but he said it loud enough for everyone to hear. See how far that gets you. A few people in the lobby made sounds that weren't quite laughter, but were in the same neighborhood. One of the suited men near the entrance shook his head in the small, private way of someone confirming something they already believed. Callum did not say anything. He looked at the officer, not at Victor Stowe. He said quietly that he would like his folder kept with his identification. The officer said that was fine. The cuffs were not rough. The officer was doing his job. None of this was the officer's fault. As they walked him toward the entrance, Callum passed within 4 feet of Victor Stowe. He did not look at him. Victor Stowe watched him go. He was still smiling when the doors closed. What Victor Stowe did not know, because he had not read far enough into the summary his assistant had forwarded, was that File 3987 was not simply an inspection report. It was a conditional report. It contained a notation, Callum's notation, documented at the time of the inspection 11 weeks earlier, that the hydraulic press at Hartwell's East Calgary service facility was operating within recertified parameters, but that the original installation had a variance in the load-bearing bracket configuration that fell outside the provincial standard that had been updated in March. The variance was not catastrophic, but it was not compliant, and the notation said so clearly. It also said that the variance had not been created by Callum's repair work, but had existed prior to it, which meant it would have predated Hartwell's most recent internal safety certification. Callum had flagged it because that was what the notation was for. He had brought the file in person because the contracts office had told him that documentation of pre-existing non-compliance needed a physical signature log so that the liability was clearly recorded. He was not trying to cause problems. He was trying to make sure that the problem was not his. The second thing Victor Stowe did not know was that the officer who had responded to the call at Hartwell's lobby had, in the course of reading the contents of the folder while Callum was being processed, found the copy of the contract and the safety office letter and flagged them to his supervisor. Not because anything illegal had occurred, but because the combination of a liability notation and a refused delivery at a commercial property was the kind of thing that sometimes turned into something else, and it was better to note it now than explain it later. The third thing Victor Stowe did not know was that there was a woman named Sandra Fong, and here was the one name from that old list that truly mattered, though she existed at the edge of this story, not its center. No. That was not right either. The woman's name was not Sandra Fong. Her name was Miriam Chow. She worked for the Alberta Occupational Health and Safety Division. She had spent 11 years in compliance. She did not work quickly. She worked carefully. She had a calendar reminder set for the Friday of every week that said check flagged submissions, and she checked it without exception, including during the week she had attended her nephew's hockey tournament in Edmonton, from which she had returned on a Tuesday and caught up on everything by Thursday. Callum's notation had been submitted to her office 6 weeks earlier as part of the standard process. She had logged it, noted the deadline for response from the facility, and when no response came by the end of that deadline, she had moved it to a secondary queue for follow-up. The refused delivery at Hartwell's lobby, once the officer's notation made its way through the appropriate channels, was what moved it out of the secondary queue entirely. Miriam Chow called the Hartwell procurement office on a Tuesday morning. She identified herself and her department. She said she was calling about a conditional inspection report on file, and that she needed to confirm the status of the pre-existing variance notation and the documentation log. The procurement officer said she was not aware of any such file. Miriam Chow said she understood, and read the file number. She said it clearly. She asked if the officer could confirm receipt. The procurement officer asked Miriam to hold. She was on hold for 6 minutes. When the procurement officer came back, she said she would need to transfer the call. Miriam Chow said that was fine. The internal review at Hartwell Industrial Solutions began quietly. That was the nature of provincial compliance reviews. They did not arrive with sirens. They arrived with letters on government letterhead and requests for documentation and a very specific kind of patience that had nothing to do with being slow and everything to do with being thorough. Miriam Chow did not call Victor Stowe. She did not need to. The review process had its own pathway, and it moved through procurement, then through facilities management, and then, when it became clear that the variance in the load-bearing bracket had been noted in 3 separate internal documents over the preceding 2 years, and had not been corrected or formally disclosed, it moved to the legal team, and then to the board, and then to a set of questions that were considerably larger than a hydraulic press bracket. It turned out that the March update to the provincial installation standard had been the subject of an industry briefing that Hartwell's facilities director had attended. The facilities director's report from that briefing was on file. It noted the updated standard. It noted that a review of existing installations should be conducted. It did not note whether that review had happened, because it had not. The board asked Victor Stowe about this during a meeting in September. He said he had not been informed of the notation. He said the facilities director had not escalated it appropriately. He said the contracts office should have handled the documentation more carefully. The board chair, a woman named Dorothy Aisling, who had been appointed to the board by Reginald Hartwell in the company's 2nd year, and who had watched the company become what it was, under people who had built things, listened to all of this, and then asked one question. She asked why the documentation log had been refused when a contractor had attempted to deliver it in person. Victor Stowe said he had not been aware that the contractor was attempting to deliver documentation. He said he had been informed that an individual without an appointment had refused to leave the lobby. Dorothy Aisling looked at him in the way that people look at something they have suspected for some time. She did not ask another question that day. The charges that eventually came through the provincial compliance office were not criminal. They were regulatory. They carried fines and remediation requirements, and a mandatory third-party audit of every Hartwell facility in Alberta, which was not a small undertaking, given that there were 7 of them. The fines were in a range that Hartwell could absorb without significant difficulty. The audit was the thing that mattered. The audit took 4 months. It found 12 additional instances of deferred maintenance on equipment that had been internally certified as compliant. It found documentation gaps in 6 of the 7 facilities. It found, in one case, a pressure valve on a loading system that had been flagged by an internal technician 18 months earlier and had not been replaced, which was the kind of finding that the legal team spent a great deal of time looking at very carefully. Victor Stowe's name appeared on the audit report in 3 places, not as a criminal matter, as a responsible authority, as the person whose signature was on the compliance certifications that the audit had found to be incomplete. In the week after the audit report was finalized, 3 of Hartwell's larger industrial clients formally reviewed their service agreements. 2 of them initiated renegotiations. The 3rd suspended its contract pending the results of its own internal review. The combined value of those three accounts was not a number that the board could absorb without significant difficulty. Dorothy Aisling convened a special board session on a Wednesday in November. Victor Stowe attended. His chair at the conference table was the same chair he always used. The view from the 9th floor was the same view. Everything looked the same. He resigned before the vote was called. His lawyer had advised it. The settlement terms were handled over 3 weeks and were not made public. Callum heard about it the way he heard about most things. Not all at once, and not from a single source, but gradually through a series of small pieces that eventually formed a shape he recognized. The first piece was a call from the officer who had processed him at the lobby. He said the original documentation had been retained as part of the flagged report and had been formally logged under Hartwell's file. He said Callum should follow up with his own legal contact about the contract status, but that the documentation was now officially in the record. The second piece was a letter from Hartwell's procurement office, 2 months after the lobby incident, confirming receipt of File 397 and conditional inspection notation. It was written in the careful language of legal acknowledgement. Not an apology, not an admission, but a formal record of what had been submitted and when. The third piece was from a woman in Miriam Chow's office, who called to confirm that the pre-existing variance had been attributed correctly in the compliance documentation, and that Callum's inspection report had been classified as a compliant submission. She said it in the flat, professional tone of someone reading from a checklist, and Callum thanked her and hung up and sat in his truck in the parking lot of Ellie's school for a few minutes before going in to pick her up. He did not feel triumphant. He did not feel vindicated in the way that people in stories feel vindicated. The sudden lightness, the exhale, the sense that something had been restored. He felt, mostly, tired. Not the bad kind of tired. The kind that comes after something has finally finished that took too long. Ellie was 11. And she came out of the school door at the usual time, and she saw him in the truck and did the thing she always did. A small wave, not dramatic, just an acknowledgement that he was there, and walked to the passenger side and got in and put her bag in the back. "How was it?" he asked. "Fine," she said. "We did fractions. Good at fractions." "Pretty good," she said. Then, after a moment, "Miss Tremblay said I explained it better than the textbook did." "Yeah?" She said I should think about teaching. Callum looked at the road. He let that sit for a second, the way he would let a good piece of machinery sit before he started it, just to appreciate the condition of it. "You'd be good at that," he said. Ellie opened her bag and took out a granola bar and broke it in half without being asked and gave him the larger piece. He took it. The Hartwell building was still there. The logo was still backlit on the lobby wall. The floors were still polished concrete with the inlaid wood paneling. The woman at the reception desk, not the same woman, but someone in the same chair, was answering a call when a courier came through the door with a package for the 4th floor and handed it over without incident and left. The lobby moved the way lobbies move when nothing is happening. People came in and pressed elevator buttons and disappeared. The light through the front windows was the long flat light of a November afternoon in Calgary, the kind that makes everything look like it's already remembering itself. Victor Stowe's name was on a small brass plate near the elevator bank, a donor recognition panel from a fund the company had contributed to during the years when his name was on the certifications and the letterhead and the conference room agenda. No one had removed it yet. It was possible no one had thought to. It was possible someone had thought to and decided it wasn't worth the conversation. Dorothy Aisling came through the lobby at 3:10 that afternoon, on her way back from a working lunch with 2 of the company's senior engineers. She noticed the brass plate. She stopped and looked at it for a moment. Not long, just a beat, in the way of someone making a note of something they will come back to when they have time. Then she continued toward the elevator, pressed the button for 9, and went back to work. There was a great deal of work to do.